All right, well, good afternoon, everyone. Hopefully you're having a wonderful day so far, and thank you for, again, joining us for our user group. My name's Sean Hunter. I just hit my 10-year mark here with Turnkey. I'm a dynamic senior consultant. And today I'm going to be working through different tips, tricks, things to do, hopefully answer questions, anything along those lines for common questions, common issues, common things that you need to overcome when an auditor is asking you for information from the system. And we're going to cover a few different facets today. We're going to of course cover SmartLists, because that seems to be the go-to place for many users for accessing, looking up, finding information, and then throwing that to some type of Excel report for the auditors to look at. But I'm also going to be diving into a common topic that I continue to bring up with different clients and things along those lines, and I just like to stress it again. We'll also cover Excel reporting on that side. Also, I'm going to explore a security smart list today in our process. So we'll take a look at creating and how a security smart list can help you at least iron out who has what, essentially. I've created that on 2 different platforms that we'll see, and then we'll dive into how we can take and hopefully start pulling out some of the GP reports into Excel versions to make your life easier. And the specific one we're going to be targeting today is the accounts receivable age trial balance, historical age trial balance. So that's always a fun one, because when you run it from GP, it's, you know, hundreds of pages long. When you run it from SRS, it's kind of the same deal. It takes a lot of work to get them formatted into a friendly Excel format if you want to be able to look at it. And it's just, this hopefully gets you to square one quicker than it normally does. So let's go ahead and kick this off, and let's just pull this up. So again, today's topic, tips to conquer common auditor requests with SmartLists, and an overview of some of the Excel reporting possibilities that are out there. First area that we explore is, you know, how do you overcome some of those questions and the things that your auditors, if they were to come to the table, everybody hopes that they don't get audited, but we know it's going to happen one way or the other at some point. But whenever that happens, how do we overcome some of the nuances and things that SmartList can offer, or what are some strategies that we can use to hopefully eliminate or even make it easier if we were to get audited again? You know, I've worked with a couple of customers where, you know, I've been here long enough that I was around for their first audit, and then I was around for their second, and one customer, unfortunately, third audit. So how can we overcome those things so that it's easier the second time around, easier the, you know, unfortunate third time around? What can we do to overcome those? So some of the common things that people forget about is when they're running these reports, and I've ran into it with individuals running the first time around, don't forget to increase your record count. So as we're in and we're working with a smart list and we want to do a large data dump of information, don't forget to increase that record, that maximum record count that you run into in the search criteria. Don't forget to add the important columns before you run it in its entirety. And my suggestion is to kind of iron it out first. One strategy that I have is when you're ready to run it in its entirety, throw it out to the maximum records, but maybe for the first couple passes on working out the columns and stuff, maybe drop the maximum record count down to a few hundred. That way it runs quick. Maybe you get a larger range of information that you're going to look at. Plus, you can iron out the columns and make sure that you have everything that you want to include on there before, again, letting it do a large data dump, getting it out to Excel, looking at it and going, ah, I forgot this, or I forgot that. So adding those important columns in. We're going to talk about some of those important columns, such as the originating documents and things like that on the financial side. Another piece that they've done good to add in the latest version of GP is making sure that the user ID associated with multiple different types of transactions are included in the data sets, so that there's a better auditing capability if you need to find out who did what or provide who did what to a specific auditor in question, or even management or anything along those lines. Another thing is, of course, setting up the defaults and assigning those favorites as they're being put in place. The security has been increased a little bit on the smart lists, which is nice. There's the ability to tag a password with SmartList now, So if you did have a very specific report that you were putting together in SmartList, or that you needed it to stay exactly the way it is because, well, from an auditing standpoint, it needed to stay that way. So if you ever needed to grab it again, it's out there and available. Maybe you have some sort of data dump you're doing for an integration, whatever it may be. Possibilities are pretty wide open on this one, but plugging a password means that in order for somebody to get in and modify that favorite, go in, change the columns, rearrange things, whatever it may be, for any modifications to that, they'd have to have that password, or they would need to add and create a new one, which helps get away from those issues. This also helps with, being able to establish kind of a beginning one for people to work with that they could build off of, but not affecting the original and such. Including and using some of the smart search criteria that's available out there in the searching. One of the things that they've added in the most recent versions are some new abilities to search in the dates, prior period, prior month, and things along those lines that weren't normally available to begin with. So we'll take a look at those that are available now in the date searching, and then again referencing that user ID in the SmartList. So let's go take a look at my GP and hop into some of these topics as we look at this. So I'm going to jump into my SmartList. I'm going to pull up my financial SmartList. I've started a couple of these just as kind of ideas. Again, shoot your questions over as we're going. If you've been audited recently, you've been audited in the past, you fear for an audit coming up in the future, whatever it may be, feel free to throw those questions in, and we'll make sure that we do our best to get those answered in the time that we have today. But as I drop down below this list, one of the ones that I started kind of looking at and working with, and just based off of previous experience, the GeoAudit SmartList. And I've got this one set up just for the current year in my Fabricam database, which of course is 2027. So in another 6 years, we'll have another GP Fabricam Day, if anybody missed that announcement whenever it came out. But in this one, I've set it up for the current year. In this case, I'm running it for all transactions. And I've added a few critical things that I would look to find within this as I'm working with an audit SmartList necessarily. And these are common questions that I've gotten asked in the past. Where did the transaction come from? That's our series column within here. What was the posting date? That's this one here. As we scroll over, any of the ones that you see with the originating document number, master ID, master name, the originating posting date or posted date, and so on, all of those are key values that could help determine where something landed in the financials versus when it was actually posted in that module. Did somebody update the posting date once it did hit the general ledger? Did somebody make a change to it? Was it posted way after the fact in the system and backdated to something? A common one I run into with auditors is, whoa, wait a second, this number changed. Why did your January numbers change? And where's the record of that? So this comes in handy here where, okay, well, we had a payment from, or an invoice from a vendor come in way after the fact, or a payment from customer, whatever it may be, that I backdated. So we posted it on the 9th of May, but in fact, it was supposed to hit our financials back in January, whatever it may be. So you'll find good references here for when it actually hit the subledger versus when it potentially hit your financials in the system. The master ID and the master name depends on where it originated from and what that information will show. So as we're kind of digging through here, we're going to see a multitude of information held in that master ID and master name, ranging from item numbers. In this case, this is an assembly transaction that went through, so we actually have the bill of material name thrown into that master ID. And then we have other areas that are customers and vendors. And again, that depends on the origination of that transaction. So if we scroll up and we look at these that have some information on them, and we scroll to the left, we can see that it originated from purchasing, and it originated from inventory, and it originated from sales, and so on. So each one of those gets tagged with a different master ID depending on where it came from in the system. Not everything gets a master ID. Your individual inventory transactions and such, they don't get a master ID necessarily because it's a one-to-many relationship and so on. But anything that is a designated one-to-one relationship with some sort of header record will end up with a master ID in there, which is helpful. Helps you track it down and find what it is. The benefit of using these smart lists is, and especially if you give your auditors access to this type of information, they have that ability to take this smart list and, of course, drill into those transactions to go even further. One piece that comes in handy as well within this that I haven't added yet, but I wanted to bring it up, is this is a common issue we run into, is where a subledger transaction was posted, but it did not get posted in the GL. It could be a transaction level posting. It could be that the setting for post through the GL wasn't turned on, or something along those lines. So if there's ever an instance where you need to review, or maybe your financials don't exactly show that information, it could be that occurrence. So one of the good columns to add into something like this to help illustrate and hopefully dig out any of those issues that may be showing up, you run a subledger report and the auditor sees one value and they don't see it in your profit and loss or your balance sheet, is the document status. So as we roll through here and we look, we want to pull in the status. If you ever can't find a column within here, it's really easy to just type in what it is that you're looking for, hit find next, and let it roll through these until it finds it. Everything should be alphabetical, of course. But once you find that column, I'm just going to add it in, and I'm just going to throw that to the top of the list. GP 2018, if you haven't seen this yet, this is fantastic, where they've kind of added some of this additional functionality to move things around, all in one fell swoop. So I can take and grab multiple columns at once and throw them up to the top. So that's just a little nicety that they've added in. But I put my document status at the top, and I'm just going to let this run through, again, just a little bit so that we can see that show up. And again, that document status helps illustrate anything that potentially has gotten to the GL, but it hasn't posted to affect my financial records yet. So another column that you would want to add in. Last one to bring up in this one, and we'll look at it in the other areas too, is, hey, who actually did something with this? Who was the user that worked with this? So that's another column that comes in handy on the auditing standpoint, not only from an internal standpoint, but from the auditors asking for this information, so they can actually go and talk to the individual involved, are those users. So if we go in and we go to our columns, we'll go to add. You'll see this document status here real quick before I refresh this page and add in the other one. So our work, these are the ones that we want to pay attention to. Anything in a work status within here is, of course, an unposted transaction. So you just got to be mindful of those transactions that are sitting out here unposted for the financial sakes. All right, so as we go through, let's go ahead and let's grab our user here. So we've got the last user. That would be the last user that worked with the transaction. As we scroll down, we should have a few others to be able to work with. And here's the user who posted. And this one's nice because it tells us who exactly posted that specific document. Because in the end, it's not necessarily the person who entered the transaction in the system, it's the person who posted that transaction and maybe didn't review it in time or something along those lines. Hey, why in the world did we end up with X showing up on our financials? And we're going to see a lot of SA rolling through here because I usually don't work as anybody else but SA in here. But the SA user would be the person who was the original person to post that transaction. So you'll see that show up within here for any of those transactions posted from the subledger. Another piece of the auditing, and that takes us into a different smart list that I developed off the top of this one. I always like to start at the baseline, lay out the different columns that I want, leaving it kind of wide open with the exception of the date and such. Once I have that laid out, it's real easy to take that template, as you would call it, and create favorites off of that. So if we wanted to create an audit smart list for just sales, it'd be really easy to create those different renditions off of this one. So GeoAudit SmartList Sales, we'll add that favorite. And then we can add our search criteria in here just for the sales transactions if I wanted to. And then save that as a favorite. If you have a new one that you're setting up or you're adding new criteria into it and you want to add something to filter that specific one, we would add that through the search criteria, either through the search at the top or even clicking on the search down here at the bottom. Once we have that criteria plugged into this new SmartList, hit favorites at the top and modify. Again, if you've ran into this or you haven't worked with it before now, this modify button is essentially our save button for any changes that we've made. And a change could be as simple as a new filter added on just to filter it down by search. It could be that I sorted a column in here and I want that to always be sorted by that specific column. It could be a number of different things, rearranging columns, whatever it may be. Any of those changes that I want to stick and stay that way for the next time around, again, go back to my favorites at the top and hit modify. That guarantees that the next time I get into that SmartList, it's saved with the series equal to sales, and in this case, it's sorting by the document date that I had selected previously. So creating these different renditions off of here, if I wanted one for sales, if I wanted one for purchasing, or whatever, get the baseline laid out, create the template, and then create the versions off of there. And then depending on the amount of workload within there, it may be, you know, if you add something to it later on, just remember you've got each one of those that you'd have to go in and touch up as well. So a lot of capabilities within here to give them visibility of that information. The one issue that I commonly run into with the GL is, and even in my case, you know, just for running it for the year of demo activity that's out here, you know, we're talking 46,000 records or 4,600 records, whatever it is, and it takes a while for that to run. So in this case, just my sales is 1,085, which is, or 1,185, not that many, but again, it took this amount of time to run, and then to export that to Excel takes another X amount of time to run that to Excel. So hand in hand with any of the out-of-the-box SmartLists is also a corresponding Excel version too. So we'll explore that here as we move down the road and look at these. But again, if you're running into that where it just takes an exponential amount of time to run these in GP and then export them to Excel, just keep in mind that there is a light at the end of the tunnel essentially with those. So GL is a big area, obviously, to be able to critique and put together for the audit report for the auditors. Subledgers, purchasing, payables transactions, accounts receivable transactions, whatever it may be. Best things that I can suggest for these from past experience is, again, adding critical columns that make sense within these, adding those date ranges for a specific period of time. So let's go in and let's add some columns real quick. So we'll go underneath columns, we'll add. Then you always have to remember is that the document date doesn't necessarily reflect when it posted. So you always have to remember that there's a posting date somewhere tagged within here that you need to be paying attention to, because that's our financial impact. Posted date. This one's a fun one because there's two different dates for posting date and posted date. So as we're adding those, this is the date that it was posted, and this is the financial posting date, the GL posting date. Just terrible naming scheme there, whereas it's friendlier in other places. But we would want to make sure that those are added in here as well, so that, again, we can get that comparison between where it ends it up on our financials versus maybe the document date or things along those lines. So a lot of information in here, posting date, of course, being the financial date that we want to look at. So as we scroll through these, again, being able to find out where something was entered and the date that it shows up in the accounts payable versus when it actually shows up on the financial record. So these are two dates that need to be compared quite often and reported upon. Additional columns that are helpful within here, again, from an internal auditing and from an auditor standpoint. Got our posted user that we can add into this. So who it was that actually posted that specific transaction. Going to see a lot of SA roll into this one. We've got some lesson users and things along those lines. So you'll see that pop up, and then that gives you the ability to go and track down that individual. Again, hopefully giving that hierarchy where you can talk to that person and say, hey, what, why did we approve this, or why did this go through? And then they can talk to the person below them if they weren't the one that actually keyed it in. So usually start at the top level here and work your way down. If it's something that you're looking for, you can always scroll through this, and the payables transactions do have a period for the aging, I believe. Let's just grab this. No, not on that side. So nothing from this side for an aging bucket. Other things that are helpful on the auditing standpoint within here, there's a lot of fields. I've had people who utilize comments on the vendor to house different pieces of information. Above and beyond that, not much else to lend on the auditing standpoint within here. Again, the strategy is building it from where it needs to be to begin with. Don't forget your document amount, this current transaction amount, and the base SmartList doesn't necessarily help us in the overall impact on payables. So kind of keep that in mind as we're working with this one. Give them an idea of what the payables balance on the financial should be, but if they need actual dollar amount for what they should be seeing debit and credit wise in that side, make sure you add in your document amount. Once we're done with this, set it up as our specific document we want for auditing. Again, throw a password in if you've got the version of GP and you want to save it as it is. Increase the number of documents in your save. In this case, I forgot to do that. So if I wanted to increase the number of documents that this displays, expand that out. Say, okay, once I expand that out, go back to my favorites and hit modify so that that sticks. And I don't have to worry with it next time. So the strategy with these is, again, building them out in a common format based off of hopefully what information they say they need, and then just making sure that you save that going forward. Preemptively setting some of these up to begin with is definitely a good route to go as well. The more of these that you get set up, if you're not using them on a day-to-day, maybe this gives you an idea of internal type audits, things of that sort. If you are fearful of an audit, the more you prepare, the better off you'll be when it actually happens, and less of your life, hopefully, that it engulfs. One of the pieces that I know that I'm asked commonly with an audit is, what do we do if an auditor wants to find out what our security is? Or how do we find out what our security is internally? So it seems like, depending on the industry that the customer is in, I've seen more and more of this where an auditor actually asks for an internal security audit before some type of certification can happen or something along those lines. So ran into a few of those here just in the last year or so, asking for that type of information. So what I did is I went through an activity and I built a smart list that will tell me who the user is, what role, task ID, product that it's associated with, what essentially type it falls into, and then what they have access to. So in this case, Bob is an order processor. Under the default user security task, he can read the about box in Microsoft Dynamics. He can also look up accounts potentially if he has access to even get to that window in the first place. So a few different things to pay attention to as you're looking at this in the audit. So the way that this functions, and let's go first, if you're using Dynamics GP without SmartList Builder. I'm going to go to SmartList. And I created this one already, and that's what we're going to review here, just from an expediency standpoint. So user security was created using SmartList Designer. To do that, I went up to the top and I hit New, which took me into the SmartList Designer window. And then from here, I started mining and pulling in the specific fields for this. If you are interested in this SmartList, I'd be more than happy to send more information your way. All of the tables that are in here are underneath the system setting and in the security grouping within here. So as I expand system out, we'll see my information checked as we get down in here. This is unfortunately a bad window to look at because it doesn't actually expand really well for visibility's sake in here, but we're going to scroll down. You can see my 4 selected tables that I'm pulling from. I first started with my security assignment user role. This is the one where you go in and you say, okay, Bob has access to order processor or customer service rep or accounting manager or warehouse manager, or whatever it may be. So that's the first window you start with. When you assign that role to them, it's essentially assigning those tasks underneath it. So it's assigning and saying, okay, the user is assigned to this role. That role is then assigned to these tasks in the system. So role to the task ID, which is those underlying ones you see in here that say, okay, task ID, default user, or INQ, INV, whatever it may be. Once we had that linked, I was then able to add in my task operations. So that was the next one, and you can kind of see the hierarchy that I worked down. So I had my role task, and then I linked in my task operations to that. And what that one does, that one gave me the information for the task ID to go along with it. And then underneath there, I was able to then surface my resources. So as I scroll down and I look at my security resource description, I can pull that in. And this security resource description is the thing that says, okay, task ID is whatever it may be, 1, 2, 3, or whatever numerical value it goes with, or in this case, INQ, INV, and whenever it links to that, this is what is underneath it. Our product, what it is, the resource name, the friendly display name that goes along with it, what series that falls into, and so on. So keeping in mind all of those values, and then this runs in its entirety for that user and essentially everything that's assigned to them. It can be a very, very, very large lot of information. You know, in this case, Bob is set up for just a very few amount of security roles in the system, but each one of those does give a large amount of information or a large amount of access within there. So we get repeating values for different things in here because each one of these different reports is essentially a security level within the RPT_INV_001. So that's through the SmartList Designer version within here. Again, if you haven't splurged and went for SmartList Builder yet, I do highly recommend it. But if you haven't made it to that jump yet where this is still accommodating your everyday needs, great. This is how we can accommodate that in there. Now, I did spin up in my other deployment of GP the version from SmartList Builder just to give you an idea of how this would look. Same kind of configuration, just a little bit friendlier in its composition for being able to add those tables in, and of course being able to see the information that's within there and so on. But again, I added in and used the security assignment role for the user. I linked that to my role task by the security role ID and role ID. It did this automatically for me. I was able to get kind of the same function within SmartList Designer using the auto link function, button as well. So I didn't have to do any of this, thank goodness. I was able to hit the auto link in my version of GP, and it automatically, logically linked everything, thank goodness. So Then I assigned my security assignment task operations to that, which joined back to the role task. And then the last one was the resource descriptions. And this is, again, that one that gives us the friendly names and everything along those lines. So I could add that in, and now I've got that joined. Again, all of these links automatically occurred. Most of the time when I add a GP table to this, it has the logical joins between most tables that you're adding in. If it's something kind of off the wall or, you know, normally isn't something that's linked together, you may have to build those yourself. But everything in this example had automatically linked for me as I built those out. And then I just went through the process of making sure that I selected, of course, the columns that I wanted for each one. Remember, in SmartList Designer, as I was creating this, make sure that you're checking the box in the order that you kind of want these things to show up, because if I wanted this up here, there still isn't that capability to, you know, cut and paste or move that column around or anything along those lines through the interface here. I'd have to do that through a favorite or through the administrative setup for SmartList options. So just a couple options for it at that point. So then the huge benefit of this SmartList is that it tells us, again, what user has what down to the granularity of the individual task assignments within each one. It's a lot of information, and obviously we could take this and, you know, pull it out into Excel if we wanted to, and break that down into pivot tables to get the smaller definitions. You could even raise it up a couple levels if you really only wanted the security to the role ID and maybe the task. You don't have to add in the additional underlying elements within it necessarily at that point. So you need to collapse it up or collapse it, or take it further down. Those capabilities are in there. But then this SmartList warrants us that capability of being able to say, okay, who has access to what, and then I can really mine this out, take it out to Excel. So before we hop in to our stored procedures and working with the historical age trial balance, one thing that I did want to visit, and I've thrown the name around several times, is the Excel reports. So as we look in GP, I always like to stress that out of the box with GP, there is the capability to deploy identical or nearly identical Excel versions, Excel refreshable versions of each SmartList favorite that was deployed with GP. So where we saw in GP the, you know, current sales journal for account transactions, there's also an Excel version of that that's deployed as well. If that's not currently deployed, if you can't get into GP and get into your financial, sales, purchasing, inventory modules and find an Excel reports option over here on the left-hand side, let us know. It's relatively easy to deploy depending on how you want it deployed. So usually, and most of the time, we will take and deploy these directly to a GP share folder where basically everybody has access in the beginning, and then the users can start accessing those from there. What does the benefit have of these? It doesn't take a GP user license to be able to view them. So this could be a strategy for you to use where, okay, I've got 12 people in the warehouse that really could use this SmartList and it would solve X amount of problems, but I don't want to buy them a license. Okay, well, Excel becomes a great option for that, where we don't have to buy them a GP license. We do have to set them up and make sure that we have SQL licenses to accommodate their access to the database, but it doesn't involve that, couple grand expense for a full user license or even the more inexpensive limited user license in the system. The other huge benefit of this, and what I stress back to in my example of looking at the GL transactions or any of them, or even if we were to pull that security one out to Excel, these run in a matter of seconds. I don't know if anybody in the meeting has ever used an Excel refreshable report, but they are quick. Even for large amounts of columns and large amounts of data, they are relatively quick. The only time that we run into an issue is if you have big data and you exceed the current amount of rows warranted by the out-of-the-box Excel option. If that's something that just adds an additional work item onto the list where we would want to look at, adding on the Power Query piece or whatnot to Excel that allows for expanded number of rows. So let's keep that in mind. But each one of these is available out of the box in the system. Let's go ahead and we'll take a look at one of those real quick so that we get an idea of the magnitude that these offer. So just for example, I'm going to go in and we're going to pull up in tandem a couple of things here, just as an example. And I like to do this just to hopefully light that fire under users. All right, so I'm running my financial transactions. I'm just going to kind of move that over here nonchalantly. I'm going to hop into financials, Excel reports. Still running over here, even though this has got to load up and finish this process, and then we'll see that SmartList over there kick off again here in a moment as it's running. But in the amount of time that I'm running this and trying to get to these Excel reports that are in here, I should be able to run this in its entirety before we even get to the first 1,000 account transactions that are in here. So if I was to come out here and pull this up and even go into our account transactions default. Oh, it beat me. So out of the box, account transactions default. This one, however, ran for every single transaction that is currently sitting in my database. So there's no filter on this. It didn't cap at 1,000 records. I opened that up and it is at the 22,000 records that are out here. Exact same columns. Out of the box again. It's not going to pick up any of your custom favorites or anything that you've made, but it's relatively easy to create these. So I do like to stress that, again, if you, especially from an auditing standpoint, if you're having to run these SmartLists and throw them out to Excel for the auditors to look at, we can go the route of Excel on these because a lot of these are available out of the box. To add new columns is easy, and we can train you relatively easily to do that. Just give you an example of one of these. Let's say that I wanted to add a new column onto my SmartList, and we go underneath here and we say, okay, I want to add my originating master ID to this. So if I wanted to do that within here, I would go in, I would select my columns. Let's go grab the master ID and the master name. And we add those columns into here. If I want to do the same thing in my Excel reports and I want to save those as it is, that exact same name becomes what we would put. I'm just going to cheat so I don't have to type this out. I'm going to grab that name for the column, copy it, or you can just type it exactly as it is, but we're going to go into my account transactions. I went underneath data. I went to properties, connection properties, definition. I'm just going to scroll to the bottom of this. I'm going to put a column, bracket, paste that in there, another bracket, and then I'm going to go ahead and put name in there as well. And that's all I have to do. Make sure they're separated with column or with a comma. At the end of the statement here, there is no comma before the from. So I'm just going to make sure that that's clean. And then it's just a matter of saying, all right. And now, just like my SmartList version has, I have all of those, and it took that long to run all of those records within here. Again, running these Excel reports for the entirety of the account transactions table, not something I would recommend. Most people have a lot of financial transactions depending on the amount of history that you have out there. But for smaller bouts of information, or if you wanted to get something more current, whatever it may be, it's relatively easy to take these and build something like that in, or use one of the out-of-the-box ones to do that. So even if we come in and we pull open and we say, okay, let's give me an account transactions current financials journal. These should already have those date filters built into it, where then you could add your columns to it and so on. So these already are built to give a current set of information for the open years or whatever they are, which means that logically it shouldn't hit that wall. A lot of customers I work with, they want something set up for, you know what, I want to see all of my purchasing transaction lines for the past couple of years. So we'll create some sort of dynamic date range that just moves with them. So when they move into the next year, it gives them the previous past 2 years, and there's no update that they have to worry about. So a lot of strategies for this, again, getting away from that. My challenge for anybody on this line that is interested in this or is contemplating whether or not they think they can use it, think of how many smart lists you're running on a weekly basis, how many of those smart lists you're running for 100 to thousands of records, and how many of those you export to Excel. How much time does that take up? And then let's talk further. So those are the out-of-the-box options that are available. And then the last part of this that I like to introduce is an endeavor that we got into, I guess, a few years back. We kept getting a constant push for, hey, I really would like to be able to use Excel for my historical trial balances, my accounts receivable, my accounts payable, even my inventory one. So as part of one of my presentations that I did for the GPUG community, I worked and put together a solution that allowed us to be able to pull out the stored procedure. And I know other companies have done it in the past, but this was the endeavor based on our customer request to take that stored procedure that it's based upon in the background. And if you're not sure what the reference to a stored procedure is, it's the piece of programming behind there that when you push the button to run the report, that's what goes out and grabs all the data and brings it back to you and displays it to you in the Dynamics GP report. So basing the same functionality off of that one, basically piggybacking off of that data, we're able to take that view or that stored procedure in this case and bring it out into Excel using Microsoft Query. Once that's in there, we're able to give fields live parameter values and allow you to be able to update those fields, and it runs your report for you. Just as the same as if you would go in and put in a range to and from or whatever it may be. The other nice thing about this is the way that the stored procedures are and the way we've started kind of putting these together for multiple clients, the end of the stored procedure can be modified to include additional elements or even join in new pieces of data. So one that I'm working on currently and that I've worked on in the past was adding in specific GL details to the accounts receivable trial balance. Hey, I want to see what GL entry this actually went to whenever it got there, because I really need to be able to see, similar to what you get in the historical inventory trial balance report, if you've ever ran that, a way to be able to see that this transaction for that customer went to this journal entry so that I can get that checks and balances going with it. So it surfaces that in that stored procedure, and we're able to, you know, it takes a little bit of manipulation of working onto it, but we're able to bolt on and add in different things. One of the catches with this is that we do have to put in the friendly naming for what your aging would look like, but then essentially underneath this, we're able to build in, using SQL, multiple other elements as well. Special coding, maybe a specific suffix or prefix that you want to mine out of your customers that would make your life easier, or there's some sort of logic you want to build into it that, you know, builds out some sort of case statement that somebody doesn't have to remember to do in their Excel report. So whatever Excel couldn't handle, or something that you wanted to add into it, or even data that's missing, we could link that all in. So once we take that and we modify this stored procedure, all my method is to add on something at the end of this, so I'm not messing with the original one. So I create this new one. We take that stored procedure and we put it together and in its execute format into the data source, similar to what we saw on our Excel report just a moment ago. So we take that execute formula and we plug that into the Microsoft query within here. And all we really do is we fill out the majority of the baseline filters that are in there. So if you've ever ran a historical age trial balance or AR trial balance from SRS, you know that there's a ton of parameters that you can put into it. Same thing on the GP side of it, where you can select, you know, hey, what's my aging date? And I can put in a range of customers, and do I want to include discounts and exclude this and this and this and this and all of that. So I usually build all of that into the query so you don't have to do it each time that you want to run this, or remember to do it each time that you run this. And the only thing that I really base this upon is the aging date. The aging date and the amount of data that's showing in here. And once we pull that in there, then it deploys and it sends basically the raw data into the Excel format. Now, it's a lot of really horrible naming within it. We can normalize that if we want to. Right now, the stored procedure is basically just giving everything back in the way that it pulls from the stored procedure, but we can give friendly naming schemes similar to what you see for this one over here that says aging description, because I named it that way. And then from there, we're able to take this. This is our raw data, which is nice because then we're able to take this, throw that into a pivot table, and format it in a nice Excel report. And because that parameter in my aging date was marked, I was able to bolt that onto a specific column. So when I came in and I created this parameter, I said that it was going to this field over here. And it's pointing to that, which means that the way that that's configured, now all I have to do is update this date and say, hey, I want to see what my aging as of 3/1 was. So 3/31. And as soon as I come off of that, this is running now that stored procedure, the same thing that GP runs, and refreshing my data set. Then I can refresh my pivot table, and my report here, my bottom line of the report for my aging, should match my GP. So if I was to come in and look at my GP AR report, try to make this as quick and painless as possible. So that same criteria that was built into the parameters of the Excel report, you can kind of see those illustrated here. I have two monitors stacked on top of each other, so bear with me here while it tries to figure out what it's doing. And let's just scroll to the bottom here and compare and contrast these and see if our numbers match, and they should. So we've got a bottom line 232, 890, 34, same values showing up between each one. So now instead of having to run this or manipulate this into a friendly Excel version, whatever it may be, we're able to surface that out of here. And from an analysis standpoint, this becomes extremely nice because anytime something dips into one of these buckets or you want to review one of those buckets, Excel's got that functionality, of course, to be able to double click on it, and that drills into that detail of the pivot table. So a lot of really nice analysis to go underneath it, and because we have that data pulled into here, the detail, we're able to drill into it to see what's going on. So a lot of doors open with this. It never hurts to ask, hey, I've got this GP report that I'm running all the time, and I really would like to see it in Excel. Let us know. We're more than happy to look into it further, and keep in mind we've got versions that we can work to deploy for you, packages available to deploy AP, AR, and historical inventory trial balance. And then depending on what version of GP you're on, we've also got the updated historical received not invoiced available as well. So a lot of different avenues there to hopefully speed up and make your life easier, both on a day-to-day standpoint and even from from an auditing standpoint. So I have talked an awful lot. Are there any questions that I can answer, both relating to Excel reports, auditing questions, things you've ran into? I'm happy to provide any insight into a topic, or we've got some great professionals on the line right now that can share their insight as well.